Well, good morning, 10 o'clock. Time to get started. Glad you're here this morning. We're on page 14 of the book talking about grief. That's our topic for the day. Don't have many more left in the book. One more. One more next week, and we'll get the new books out and get them started as well. So we're on grief this morning. We'll begin with a word of prayer, and Lynn Butler, would you lead some prayer, please? Well, the topic is grief, and it asks to define grief, question number one, and that's the anguish experienced after significant loss. And grief is something that we're all going to have to go through. At some point, it cannot be avoided. It may be over a loved one who was passed on from us. That's a possibility. Or it may be some unforeseen circumstance that's happened in our life. Maybe some kind of loss of our health, some kind of illness, and people will grieve over that. But it's something that we got to go through. And it can be very stressful. We all know we've been through it. Very stressful. And they say the most stressful type of grief is the loss of a spouse or the loss of a child, either one. And then you have the events during the year that come up that renew that grief. It may be an individual's birthday, or it may be a holiday or anniversary or something like that, and those particular thoughts come back to you, memories come back, and it can be very difficult to go through. But there again, it's just a part of what we go through. It's a natural process. And God has given it to us so that we can handle loss. We got to be able to handle it. And grief is a part of the process of handling loss. But what people try to do today, they want to avoid that process. They don't want to go through the grieving process, but they're going to go through it somewhere, somehow. So when it comes to funerals, it's no longer a funeral, it's a celebration of life. That's what we want to call it now. Celebration of life. We don't want to go through the sad process. Well, eventually when that funeral is over and everybody goes home and that person is there by themselves, they're going to go through that process. But it'd be nice if they could go through it with help from other people around them early on, instead of calling it some kind of celebration of life. Start that process and go through it. We don't want to go through it. We try to avoid it, but it's going to happen. Christ went through it. He didn't, at the tomb of Lazarus, he didn't call it a celebration of life. He wept. Now he was weeping for those that were in grief around him. He knew what he was going to do in raising Lazarus. But still, it was something that he understood. And he understands when we have it as well. It's just a part of going through life. There's different stages of grief. Everybody goes through them. You have this, they call it DABA. You have denial. You have anger. You have bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When we lose individuals, we go through that. When a person is diagnosed with a terrible illness, incurable illness, they go through it as well. And you go through these stages, and sometimes you'll back up and you go through them again, and that's just a part of it. A lot of studies have been done on this. But again, it's something that the Lord understands. He knows we got to go through. And we try our best to get through it, and we do. It doesn't say it's going to be easy, but we do our best to get through them, and we do. I say we do, at least most do. There's some that don't. They can't handle it, and it's difficult for them. Question number 2, what are some of the things that cause grief? There, Job, chapter 2. If we know about Job's life, what he experienced. Like in, chapter 1, I added that one in there, chapter 1, 14 through 17. He lost all his possessions. You know, the devil got after him. God gave the devil permission. And he lost all his possessions. He lost everything he had. Even his home, he lost that. Well, that can cause grief when we lose things like that. We begin to wonder, how am I going to make it now? It's all gone. And we would think, well, I would never lose mine. I have it secured. I got this or that. So did Job. He thought, I'd never lose mine. It can happen. You have a loss of life. In Job 1, 18 and 19, Job lost his children, 10 of his children, all 10 of them. At one time, he lost them. Well, that's something right there that caused a lot of grief, and he did. And then Job 2, 7 through 8, when he lost his health. Now, that's a stage of grief. And all this happened, his possessions and children happened in the same day. And then loss of life came a couple of days later. Loss of health came a couple of days later. So he was really in a state of grief. If it could happen to him, it happened. But he made it through it. He got through it. B, 1 Samuel 1, 10 through 16. This is for Hannah in the Old Testament. She said, do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken until now. She was wanting a child, and she was grieved because she couldn't have one. And the Lord, she prayed. You remember, she prayed, and Eli saw her there, and Eli was thinking, well, you're drunk or something doing this. But she said, no, I'm not. I'm praying for a child, and sure enough, the Lord blessed her with a child, Samuel, and she told the Lord, if you give me a child, I'll turn him over to your service at a young age, and she certainly did. Around the age of 6, many think. I gave him to the service of God, but he was a great prophet. So she was grieved over not being able to bear children. But the Lord answered her prayer. C, Proverbs 17:25. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. Children can bring about grief. Nothing will give a parent more happiness than a child. And nothing will give a parent more grief than a child. They can go both. It can go either way. There's a lot of parents out there who have been grieved over the actions of their children. I'm not talking about just the death of a child, the actions of their children, sometimes the way they live. And that can grieve a parent. So a father can grieve, a mother can grieve as well when the children just don't behave. D, Psalms 51 and verse 3. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. This is David. His sins caused him grief. Why did I do it? I know he had to have to bear the consequences. He knew that. He looked back over his life and, boy, I wish I hadn't done that. It caused him grief. Look at the consequences that brought about. Again, most everybody can say that. Boy, I wish I hadn't done that. And now, look where I'm having to deal with it now. That's grief. Grief can cause that. And then E, Acts 4, 1 through 2. Now as I spoke to the people, the priests, the captain of the temple, and the Sadducees came upon them, being greatly disturbed as they taught the people and preached in Jesus the resurrection. This is a group of Sadducees who had grief because of what they thought that the apostles were teaching was error. We can have grief when error is taught. Now, these Sadducees were wrong. The apostles were right in what they were teaching. They were wrong, but yet they had grief over this, what they saw was misinformation. Again, it can happen. It can cause us to lose sleep at night. Maybe you never have. But to know there are those who have lost a great amount of sleep because of something comes into the church or to, say, the local congregation, some kind of error that's trying to be pushed, and it's just causing turmoil. That can cause grief within a church because of error, and people will not listen to reason. So the Sadducees had it. They had grief, but truth was being taught. They just didn't accept it. Number 3, what are some of the ways people react to grief? Genesis 34, first ones 1 through 2. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, when she had born to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. Verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. And then 26, and they killed Hamor and Shechem, the son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. I would suggest you read the whole story, everything that happened here in verse 34 through 26, 1 through 26. Good story there, but what happened, some of the brothers here, Jacob got angry. This was his daughter, and Jacob comes out with a plan. The plan eventually led to the killing of Shechem and his father Hamor. Sometimes grief can do that. Somebody's taken, some crazy person takes another person's life, and for not revenge, they take them out. So anger can be a part of bringing about grief in a person's life. B, Psalms 31, 9 through 10. Here's David again. He says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. My eye wastes away with grief, yes, my soul and my body. For my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away." I'm not sure what David is referencing here. It may be when he was being pursued by Saul, and Saul was trying to kill him, and David was running and hiding, trying to preserve his life. It could have been that. Or it could have been when his own son got after him, Absalom, trying to kill him. Either way, he had grief, not knowing if he was going to see the light of the next day. That's a lot of grief. He had grief. Are they going to? Is this the day that I will lose my life? He didn't know. Well, God got him through it, of course, but still, grief can be brought about with uncertainty. We're just not uncertain about things. And I don't know if any of us have ever had the point of thought we're going to lose our life to somebody. Maybe those who served in the military may have, but certainly everyday activities, maybe not. But David did, and he was in grief because of that being pursued. C, Matthew 27, 3 through 5. This is about Judas. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." And they said, "What is that to us? You see to it." Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. Judas had grief for betraying Jesus. He had remorse for doing it. He didn't have repentance. He had remorse. And remorse didn't do it with God. He didn't ask God for forgiveness. He should have, but his grief led to his death. He just couldn't get over doing what he had done by betraying Christ. So he went out and he hanged himself. Sad to say, there's some who don't handle grief very well, and they have taken their own life because they missed the person that was passed on. Not anything they've done wrong. They just a state of grief. D, Job 1:20 and 22. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshiped. So what did Job do? He worshiped. And again, that's a good thing. He turned to God. He turned to God. He lost, again, remember, he lost his possessions. He lost his family, his children at least. He lost his health. And what did he do? He turned to God for help and worship. Again, that's by far the best thing to do. Go to prayer, to worship. He had some friends that came, but they didn't do very much. They were more of a nuisance than anything. But still, he did turn to God in worship. Number 4, what did Isaiah say prophetically concerning Christ? Isaiah 53 and verse 3. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Christ had grief over the rejection of him. He did what he could. He tried to help people and teach in truth, and still many of them rejected him, and that caused grief. One time he wept as he looked over Jerusalem. He said, I would have helped you like a mother helps her chickens, little chicks, take care of them, but they wouldn't listen to him. And that brings about grief. If you ever try to talk to someone and they don't listen, and you see them go headlong into what you try to advise them not to do, that can cause grief as well. Sometimes people just will not listen. So Christ understands that. Question 5, what did Peter say was praiseworthy? 1 Peter 2:19. For this is commendable if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. We can have grief for doing what is right, but you don't want to have grief for doing what is wrong. And people sometimes will have that kind of grief. Well, they get caught, and they have some grief because they got caught. They won't tell everybody, here's what I did, and they laugh about it, and everything, doing that which is wrong. There's simply no pride and being taken doing what is wrong. So we may have grief. Let's have grief in doing what is right, doing the right thing. Question number 6. About what should we all grieve? A, Job, again, 30 verse 25. He says, have I not wept for him who was in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Job is telling here that Job was a great man, a very good man. And he helped a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And when Job saw people in grief, he grieved. Don't we do that? Somebody's going through a difficult time, do we not grieve for them? Or we do that. At least we should. We shouldn't be saying, they'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. They deserve it. Somebody else will handle their problem. No, we should grieve with them. The Bible says, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. That's a part of it. Job helped a lot of people. And when he saw somebody grieving, he grieved as well. And Maybe he took action as well. He saw the grief. What can I do? And maybe he did something. Sometimes people don't want anything done. If you ever carried food to somebody had a cause of a death, you're helping. You're grieving with them as well. If you ever prayed for somebody that was in a state of grief, you're grieving with them. So Job did that. It's a good thing that we get involved in that. B, Mark 3 and verse 5. When he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. Christ did a miracle here. A man had a withered hand. Christ healed that hand. He did it on the Sabbath. And those around him didn't like it because he did it on the Sabbath. And it grieved Christ that they would be so hardened of the heart that they would go get their ox out of the ditch if he fell in the ditch on the Sabbath, but they didn't want Christ to heal anybody on the Sabbath. And Christ was grieved at that because they had no compassion for people. They did for their ox, but not for people. So they had a hardness of heart. They didn't understand the Scripture. That's what their problem was. Didn't understand it. So may we have compassion and not have a hardness of heart. C, Ruth 1:13. Would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Now this is Naomi talking to Ruth. And Naomi, that's her mother-in-law. She's up in age. And Ruth has lost her husband, So here is Naomi saying, if I could have children, I would have a son, and eventually you could marry him. There'd be a big age difference there, major age difference. But she's grieving here because of Ruth not having a husband. Things are difficult for Ruth, so she's in grief for her. So she didn't expect Ruth to wait for her to have a son. That wasn't going to work. But still, she had grief because of the loneliness and the difficulty that Ruth was going to have should she not find a husband. Question 7. What kind of things grieve God? Hebrews 3:10. Therefore I was angry with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. It grieves God, first of all, when people do not know His Word. That's grief. It grieves God when people do know His Word and they go astray. That grieves Him as well. Because God wants all to be saved. He doesn't want anyone to be lost. That's what He wants. So it grieves Him to see this. People, I don't care about it, and they go their way. And those who had it and lay it aside, that's grief as well. So God has understanding of grief when people do not listen to Him. And then the bottom, the classroom questions there, how can our grief improve our faith, worship, and service? Well, it can bring us closer to God. We can have a stronger faith, knowing that these things are going to work out. God's going to take care of us. It can make us have maybe a deeper worship toward God. Our service, helping those who are going through grief, helping them because we have been there. So there's ways we can benefit from it. Number 2, discuss grief's byproducts, self-pity, vengeance, and depression. Self-pity, poor me. Here's the person who hasn't realized it's coming. Grief comes to all of us. It hasn't singled anyone out. It happens to everyone. And sometimes we're so caught up in our own lives, we fail to look around us and see others are hurting. And we need to do that. He can help us, prepare us, and realize that it happens to everyone, and we're not in it alone. And then the last one, what can be done to prepare ourselves and others for grief? We don't need to deny it. Again, know it's going to happen eventually. And it's not something that it overtakes our thoughts. Every day I'm thinking about it. Don't do that. But we need to be thinking, how am I going to handle this should it happen? When it happens? How am I going to handle the grief process when my spouse dies? How am I going to handle that? And in some little ways, we need to be thinking about these things and trying to prepare ourselves. Well, here's what I'm going to try to do. This is the right thing to do. And don't dwell on it. Well, you'll go crazy. But from time to time, and especially when when others have lost their mates, think about, how am I going to handle it when it comes my time? And maybe look and see how others have handled it and try to put it toward yourself. So some folks just don't want to think about it, and then it hits, and it's tough. It can be tough. It's tough regardless, but still we want to do our best to try to prepare ourselves for that time. Anything on grief? Well, okay, next week we'll take up the topic of sin on page 15 and then get the new book started next week. Thank you for your attention.